Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Saturday, February 15th, day 498 of the war. Amanda Borschel Dunn here with our military reporter Emmanuel Fabian for a special Saturday hostage release episode. Manny, thanks you for joining me as ever.
Hi, Amanda. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Released hostages Sagui Dekel-Chen, Sasha, Troufanov, and Iair crossed back into Israel this morning after being paraded on a stage in southern Gaza in a propaganda-filled release ceremony by the Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad terror groups after 498 days in captivity. Manny will fill us in on the ceremony and their health status as much as we know, as well as discuss the heightened tensions in the Gaza Strip this past week. We'll hear about an apology from the IDF's chief of staff to 4 released female surveillance officers and what is happening in southern Lebanon just days before the IDF is meant to completely withdraw. All this and much, much more when we're back. This morning, Sagui Dekel-Chen learnt a daughter was born to him while he was in captivity. Sasha Troufanov was reunited with his mother, grandmother, and girlfriend, who were all released from a previous ceasefire mediated in November 2023. He today potentially learnt of his father's death on October 7th, 2023. Iair crossed back into Israel this morning, but his brother is still held hostage in Gaza. Manny, we've now seen several staged hostage release ceremonies, and did anything jump out to you other than the fact that, of course, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad released their hostages in a joint ceremony today?
This is the first time we've seen Hamas and Islamic Jihad release hostages together. The last time we saw Islamic Jihad release hostages, it was Ariev and Gadi Moses. It was a very chaos-filled event with no stage, as Hamas does. This time, 2 of the hostages were being held by Hamas, and the 3rd by Islamic Jihad. So Hamas seemed to have taken over the event and done it in the way that we've seen Hamas do it, which is this orderly stage, and the hostages go up on the stage and they speak in front of the crowd, and then they hand it over to the Red Cross. So it did go smoothly, I would say, compared to what we saw last time in Khan Yunis. Same area, actually, outside Sinwar's destroyed home. But it did go very similar to the previous releases carried out by Hamas. Another thing that did stand out for me was the gifts, in quotations, that they were given. We've seen Hamas and Islamic Jihad give the hostages, the release hostages, all sorts of commemoration items as they leave. This time we saw Hamas and Islamic Jihad. I don't know who gave them the gifts this time, but all 3 of them had these release forms which we've seen previously, but they were also given this sort of embroidery with the map of the claimed borders of Palestine on it. The kind of thing you put up on your wall, I guess. And additionally, one of the hostages, Iair, was given this hourglass which featured images of the hostage Matan Zangaukar and his mother Einav on it, reading the time is running out. Einav Zangaukar, of course, is one of the most prominent activists for the release of the hostages. Very active, always on television, and is very known, and clearly Hamas and know this as well. Matan is not slated to be freed in this phase of the ceasefire deal. So this is part of Hamas's propaganda efforts, its attempts to try and pressure the families and to I would just say it's psychological terror as they have continued to do throughout the releases. We saw on the stage again Hamas propaganda posters, some of them AI generated with all sorts of text reading on them with some Hebrew mistakes, of course, because they apparently don't have anyone that speaks Hebrew anymore, but that we've seen in previous releases as well.
Manny, to my eyes, the men looked a lot better than the men did who were released last week. But of course, Iair suffered a dramatic weight loss, of course, but they were all walking, it seemed, rather independently, unlike last week, which was so shocking when we saw the emaciated men being supported on stage. What was your feeling, and what are we hearing in terms of their health?
So we understand that they're in relatively okay health condition. We saw that Iair was limping. From what I understand, he was shot on October 7th and is evidently still wounded, but it doesn't seem to have been anything right now that's life-threatening. They do seem to be in relatively good health. They're not as thin as we saw the hostages last week, and I think that shows that some of the hostages are being held in very terrible conditions and some are in less terrible conditions. So I think with Alexander Sasha Troufanov, he was being held by Islamic Jihad, and we know that throughout the war, Troufanov being a dual Russian-Israeli citizen, the Russians have sort of behind the scenes been sending messages to Hamas and Islamic Jihad, pushing for his release, and I think that may have contributed to Islamic Jihad in this case, keeping him in relatively good condition. We saw throughout the war as well that Islamic Jihad released 4, if I'm not mistaken, videos of Sasha in captivity. The last 2 were released, one this morning, one last night. So it does seem that some of the hostages are being held in relatively better conditions than others, being given food and water more often, but there are others that Israel knows are being held in terrible conditions inside tunnels deep underground, being given very little food and water. And that's something that we may see in the future releases. It basically shows that not all of the hostages are in exact same conditions. They're being held in different areas of Gaza, some inside tunnels, some inside buildings. So their conditions could be very different.
And of course, appearances can be deceiving, as we saw Ofer Calderon, who looked relatively hale and in fact requested a beer upon his release from the Israeli soldiers, is now hospitalized with pneumonia. So these men have been through a lot, and of course their bodies are facing that right now. Manny, let's talk about what's happening on the ground in Gaza in terms of the IDF buildup or withdrawal, draw down at least. And in this past week of heightened tensions, of course, there were a lot of statements seeming to indicate that more soldiers are being placed inside and along the border of Gaza, and potentially that reservists are being called up. What is happening?
So I think it's good to clear this up. There has been no additional deployment of troops in Gaza, but what the army has done is reservists called up several units and have them deployed to southern Israel, readying for the event of the ceasefire deal collapsing and Israel having to return to war, and they'd be able to do so very quickly by having all these soldiers ready. Additionally, the army has basically prevented all combat soldiers and other critical units in the Southern Command from going on furlough or taking a break or being on leave. This means that all the soldiers that are currently deployed to Gaza will remain in Gaza. Nobody is going home right now. Normally they do a rotation out. On the weekend, some of the soldiers get to go home, others stay on, and then the next week the others go. So that's not happening right now. So there is a buildup of forces in southern Israel, but there's been no change to the deployment inside Gaza right now. That could change if the hostage release does not continue. We saw this week Hamas announced that it would postpone the release of the hostages, and it was a bit of a back and forth between Israel and Trump making statements about how all the hostages will be released by 12 p.m. today. It was all resolved in the end, and everything's back on track to exactly how it was beforehand. Israel hasn't given in to any additional demands, and Hamas isn't releasing any additional hostages. But we'll see, hopefully, in the following weeks it will remain on this track, and all the hostages will be released, all the Phase 1 hostages will be released according to what was agreed upon. I don't think there's going to be any new changes right now to the deal. We've only got a few more weeks left of it.
As time goes on with these releases, we are hearing more and more stories of the conditions of the hostages. And yesterday, Keith Siegel released a video statement thanking U.S. President Donald Trump for getting him out, pleading for the release of all the other hostages, and also describing a little bit in very gentle language about the torture he faced inside. We're also hearing from the mothers of the female surveillance soldiers who were recently freed from Gaza after over 15 months in captivity, and we're hearing that they were forced by Hamas to watch videos of male hostages being tortured. And additionally, they were forced to serve as maids for their Hamas keepers. In a meeting on Friday morning, IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi apologized to these 4 recently released soldiers for their warnings not being treated seriously before the October 7th, 2023 Hamas attack. Halevi met with Agam Berger, Liri Albag, Naama Levy, and Karina Ariev, who were released from Hamas captivity after 15 months. And the 5th surveillance soldier released from Hamas captivity, Daniela Gilboa, was not present at the meeting. So this was a very charged meeting by all accounts. All the statements that were leaked from this meeting are very, very moving, emotional, maddening, I would even say. And it was striking to me that the female soldiers really stood up to Halevi and berated him for not listening to them. Manny, what was your sense of the leaked statements from the meeting?
So I'll just add that they met with outgoing IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi. He is leaving on March 5th. I think this all kind of comes together now that he's leaving his post over the failures of October 7th and now doing all these sort of final meetings with these released surveillance soldiers, and he's wrapping up the investigations. And that was another topic that was spoken about during this meeting. So the 4 soldiers, of course, told Halevi that, what they experienced on October 7th when they were taken hostage, 15 months in captivity, asked him why there's no investigation into this. And of course, he told them that they are investigating, they're finishing the investigation, and that their testimony should also be included in it. He called upon them to sort of help with the investigation. And he also apologized to them for the way the army treated them. This has been sort of no secret that in the months before October 7th, the surveillance soldiers reported activity along the border with Gaza, various activities that Hamas were carrying out, training sessions, digging holes, placing explosives. And these warnings were practically ignored by their commanders and senior intelligence officials, of course, until the day itself when everything went down. So Halevi apologized to the soldiers for the army not taking their warnings seriously, for letting them down, of course, on October 7th itself, for not being able to protect them. It's important to note that the surveillance soldiers at the time were not armed or anything. They operate on a very restive border, but they're not exactly armed or trained to fight back or anything. And it was a very, very tense meeting from what I understand from all the leaked quotes that were released. And Halevi again said that he takes responsibility for what happened, and understands that they were very, very brave during their captivity and during what they went through when they were taken, also during their release, when we saw them go up on the stage and wave to the crowd during their release a couple of weeks ago.
We'll go to a short break and then discuss Lebanon and the West Bank. And we're back. The outgoing deputy commander of UNIFIL was injured yesterday, according to the International Peacekeeping Force, after a convoy taking troops to the Beirut airport was attacked amid pro-Hezbollah demonstrations in the area. Some supporters of the Hezbollah terror group have blocked the road to the country's only airport for 2 consecutive nights over a decision barring 2 Iranian planes from landing in the Lebanese capital. And this decision came after the IDF said Iran was smuggling cash to Hezbollah via civilian flights. So Manny, tell us more about this particular saga, and then we'll discuss what is meant to happen in 3 days.
So the IDF put out an interesting statement a few nights ago, saying that Iran's IRGC Quds force was smuggling cash to Hezbollah using civilian flights from Tehran to the Beirut airport. And the IDF said that it is actively giving information to the committee overseeing the ceasefire to basically foil these attempts. And the army noted that not all of these attempts to stop it have been successful, meaning that cash has been smuggled to Hezbollah during the ceasefire. Immediately after, it was the morning after, a flight that was supposed to fly from Tehran, from the international airport there, to Beirut, was told by Lebanese authorities that it wouldn't be able to land. And Lebanese nationals were then stranded at the airport in Tehran, unable to return home. And this happened again with another flight, a second one that was supposed to land. And I believe that Israel provided the committee with information that on this flight specifically, there is an attempt to smuggle cash to Hezbollah. The committee then told the Lebanese state, and the Lebanese authorities notified Iran that, or specifically the airline in that case, that its flight wouldn't be able to land in Beirut. And in response, of course, we saw this rioting by Hezbollah supporters, members and other supporters, and including attacking UNIFIL and injuring the deputy chief of the mission.
So, Manny, it appears that the Lebanese state is actually trying to adhere to this brokered ceasefire, which is meant to run out, the extension is meant to run out on February 18th. And the government is taking an active stance against this Iranian smuggling, et cetera, et cetera. At the same time, they are fully opposed to the IDF remaining in southern Lebanon, though it appears, to me at least, that the U.S. is kind of on board with the idea that the IDF should remain. So what are you sensing is going to happen in 3 days?
So from what I understand, Israel will withdraw from most areas of southern Lebanon in the next few days, but there's been some sort of agreement for the IDF to remain in 5 points inside Lebanon. That's what I've been hearing. So this is apparently the US has agreed to this. We haven't heard it officially yet. And Lebanese media have also sort of reported on the 5 locations. There's these sort of hills on the other side of the border. And there's basically an undetermined amount of time that the IDF will remain in those locations. That's as much as we know right now. We haven't yet seen Israel officially announce this or the US officially announce this. Lebanon, via its local media, have said that it doesn't agree to Israel remaining in Lebanon past the February 18th deadline, but it does seem to me, based on all the reports that's been going around, that Israel will withdraw, or the IDF will withdraw from all the villages, but remain at these strategic points over the border for some amount of time. It's not clear how long yet. There was a report that Israel wanted to remain there for 10 more days up until February 28th, the end of the month. But we'll see when we have to wait for an official announcement on this. But it is really very close and just in a few days.
And so finally, before we go, I just want to check back with you about the ongoing counterterrorism operation in the West Bank. And we, of course, heard a report on Thursday that Israeli troops shot dead a Palestinian suspect at the entrance to a military base near Nablus. Because there was an explosive-laden car outside of Jenin. So make a little sense of this to me, and let's understand, is this counterterrorism operation still ongoing, and is there an end date?
It is still ongoing, that is correct. There's no end date, but as far as I understand, as long as Israel's releasing the Palestinian prisoners during the ceasefire deal, then this operation will still be ongoing. The army wants to operate in the West Bank within the Palestinian cities, towns, villages, and refugee camps during the release of the prisoners to try to foil any attempt by Hamas to regain power with these released prisoners, who would, perhaps some of them will go on and continue to try and carry out attacks. That's the goal there, is to basically neutralize or destroy these organizations of Hamas and Islamic Jihad. In each Palestinian city, there's local wings of these terror groups to try to organize. So Israel's trying to foil these organizations and prevent them from regaining power in the context of the release of the Palestinian prisoners in the hostage deal.
And there are meant to be, 340 almost released today, is that correct?
Today, 369 are being released, but only 10 are being sent to the West Bank. The others, one is being sent to East Jerusalem, and 25 are being deported to Gaza or abroad. And then the remaining 333, we're talking about Gazans who were detained during the ground operation, who are just being sent back to Gaza. So in total, there are 36 who are life sentence prisoners who are being sent back to wherever they previously came from, or abroad, with 25 of them being sent either abroad via Egypt or to Gaza.
Okay, Manny, and your sense of this ongoing West Bank operation, it's to try and quell the unrest as these prisoners are released, but what is the other goal of this operation? Is it also to stave off future terrorist attacks, such as what we saw near Jenin?
Always is. Always, that's the part of the goal. And when I spoke to senior officers, when I visited Tulkarm and during this operation, we were told that one of the main goals is to dismantle the these terror, they call them brigades in the West Bank. There's the Tulkarm Brigade, the Nablus Brigade, the Jenin Brigade. They're sort of an organization of Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, and all other various small terror groups. They kind of organized together in the Palestinian cities. Israel wants to dismantle those and prevent them from carrying out attacks. We've seen in the last few weeks of the operation that the head of the network in Tulkarm was killed, the head of the network in Jenin was killed. They have replacements, and they're not like the commanders you think of in Gaza who have been in their positions for maybe decades. We're talking about, the oldest commander's like 23 years old there, so they replaced them very quickly, but the idea is to dismantle these networks to prevent them from planning additional attacks, prevent future attacks, but also try and quell the violence right now, or anything that's imminent that they're planning also to prevent those.
And one final question before I let you go on this Shabbat day, which is actually a beautiful day after such bitingly cold weather here in Israel. So Manny, how much cooperation is there with the Palestinian Authority in this ongoing counterterrorism operation in the West Bank?
It depends where we're looking at. There is cooperation in some areas more than others. In Jenin, for example, we saw that as the IDF operated there, the Palestinian Authority withdrew from the Jenin refugee camp area and deployed itself on the outskirts of the city. And then any of these Palestinian gunmen or terror operatives who were trying to flee, as they were trying to flee to Jenin, the city, or to other areas of the West Bank, they were then detained by the PA. We saw this happen a few times during the operation. So the cooperation is still definitely there. The coordination is there. The PA hates Hamas as much as Israel does, so it has an interest as well to regain control of these areas of the West Bank that it lost control of years ago with Hamas and Islamic Jihad regaining power and taking control of these areas.
Manny, thank you so much for your updates and insights today.
Thank you.
Listeners, please check out our live blog for more updates on released hostages Sagui Dekel-Chen, Sasha, Troufanov, and Iair Horan. Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's daily briefing today. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by Adina Karpuch. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, Shalom.